G'day everyone, welcome to the Opal Mills. My name's Phil, and this channel is all about what I get up to with Opal, and it could go from trying to mine, buying rough parcels, cutting them, carving them. If it's matrix, we treat them with acid, and doublets, inlay, setting in silver and gold, and there's going to be a few other things I'm going to attempt this year, casting be one. But before I get into the usual, what I'm going to do for the year, I've sort of got a question that I've been asked quite a bit, and I was a bit intrigued myself on, well, what is the answer to tell people? And that's, what is the best light for me to view my opal in? And so, like a fool, I've attempted to try and answer this question. So rather than say I'm going to answer it, I'm just going to fill your head full of a bunch of what I've learned about light, how its source is relevant to the spectrum, and therefore the colour, why the colours show. We'll go into the spheres of the opal to explain a bit about all that. Yeah, I'll just tag along and hopefully we might get a bigger picture on what is the best light to look at the opal in, and we actually might find that a question should also be, when buying an opal, what light am I more likely to be viewing my opal in, and what opal shows best in that light? So I'll get on with it with a bit of a display, some diagrams, and yeah, if you're interested, stick with, otherwise there'll be another video coming out soon with cutting, and we'll get to that. But for now, I'm going to try and answer this question. Alright, to start this off, we are going to have a little bit of a lesson, just so we're all on the same page here. I know some people have a varying degrees of understanding on how light works, and some may not. So here's how I understand it. So to start with, you've got your light source, and that could be the sun, as in daylight, and you've got things like artificial light, which is like a fluorescent light. You've got a cool white light, LED, and incandescent. If I can spell right, incandescent. So that's our light sources. Now, these all emit photons, and that's where it starts, and where it's going to finish is in your brain. So everything that happens between this light source and your brain is how your brain will interpret the photon's interactions since leaving its source. And there's quite a number of things that could happen between the light photon leaving the source and bouncing around till it finally went into your eye, and your brain depicts an image based on what you know and what it should represent in reality, and that's what sight is. So based on that, we go, all right, we've got a photon. What is a photon? Well, we all know it's a little package of energy. It's a vibration. It's got a frequency at which it vibrates, but with white light, it has every frequency inside it. And due to this fact, we see a photon of all energy in the one particle that hits our eye, and we can't determine what one we're seeing, what color, what frequency. And so our brain just puts this, what we perceive as white. Now, when no light obviously comes into the eye, our brain perceives it as what we know as black. Now, that's why these aren't colors, they're just presence and absence of pure light. Color comes into it when the light obviously is going to split up to frequencies. So obviously in this graph, you can see it's got the whole spectrum of the frequency of light, from gamma all the way up to the infrared and so forth. But the visible spectrum that refers to the Roy-G-Biv, what we can see: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violets. So our eyes can only detect those photons vibrating at the frequency required to produce the spectrum that then hits the eye, and your brain says green or blue or red. So, with all that happening, how does the opal play into, and how does that affect why am I seeing what I'm seeing with the opal? So then we've got to backtrack and jump over to, well, what is the opal again? Grabbing my notes here. So with opal, we have silica spheres in hydrated water, basically, and I think there's a touch of nitrogen in there. So SiO2N H2O, silica dioxide, nitrogen, hydrogen dioxide, something like that. So anyway, that's what opal is. There we go. So these form little spheres, and those spheres can grow quite large, and smaller and larger than this, but for the purposes of understanding the colour spectrum, we have silica spheres ranging from a little 150 nanometers, and when white light hits that, this sphere absorbs all of the spectrum except blue, and it says you can have the blue back. So that will then reflect into the eye, and the brain will determine that frequency represents the blue spectrum, and you will see blue. If we increase the size right up the other end to 400 nanometers, that's where we will see the red shift in the spectrum. And obviously somewhere in between there will be all the other colours in the spectrum, but we can't see beyond the blue and we can't see above the red. Our eyes will not detect these frequencies. So now we understand that. There's a couple of other things. When opal is white or black opal or grey or crystal, it's the way that all this takes place when you have, say, a crystal layer over a black potch. And so when a photon comes in, it can either do one of three things. The photon will either be reflected by being absorbed into an electron, in turn releasing a filtered photon, a frequency our eyes can detect, or B, it'll be absorbed entirely and released as thermal heat, or it'll be transmitted an unfiltered frequency or photon, as in if there was no black potch, that photon could possibly pass straight through. But because there's the black layer there, any photons that make it past here and don't reflect colour, they hit down under here and they're absorbed. And they don't reflect, therefore the eye underneath detects no light coming and we perceive black. And that's the contrast benefit for the colour on the top and the benefit for the black opal. And that's why the contrast and the black opal will show a much more intense of equal colour. Like you take that crystal layer and take that black off, put white, put grey, black just shows the best contrast. And that's all because of the way light behaves when it comes in, bounces off into our eye as one of the spectrums. So how does that affect the original question? What is the best light to view my opal in? So the best light would be the whitest light to get the truest representation of your opal. So sunlight will reflect all the spectrum because all the spectrum is present when the white light came in. Unfortunate for artificial light, this is not also the case. So there's a graph. So in this graph, you can see that the daylight clearly has an abundance of most of the visible spectrum. Goes right up at the blue and the green, goes down a bit at the red, but there's a lot of it that our eyes will detect from daylight, as opposed to fluorescent. So over in the fluorescent, it doesn't seem to reflect too much blue, but it does reflect greens and orange. Now, what that means is any blue opal will show blue, all the orange and greens will be absorbed into it, and only the blue, if you've got just a blue stone, should be all that's reflected. But you won't get a very good blue response for intensity purposes or brightness, because the fluorescent just isn't obviously putting out too good a blue. The greens and orange would benefit very greatly. Probably fluorescent looks like it could produce a better spectrum for green and orange than daylight, as it has higher greens and orange. Over to cool white LED, so now you've got the blues are more intense and the greens and not so much the orange. So it's kind of the opposite in respect to fluorescent. So orange stones will show orange, but just not as good a orange as fluorescent or daylight, or as you'll see incandescent. And incandescent, there you go, that's just a gradient all the way up through to the red, so not so good for the blues, into the greens okay, yellow getting a bit better, oranges and reds not too bad. And so this is obviously going to be, well, what's the best light to view my opal in? Well, what colours are in your opal? What colours are present? If you have greens and orange, it's clearly you'll benefit better out of the fluorescent light. It'll show off better. Or incandescent for the reds. Daylight for the green as well, and the blue, as well as the cool white LED for the blue. But incandescent and fluorescent, probably not so good for the blues. And when you've got a multicolour stone, that'll affect how the multicolour is displayed. And if you've got a bicolour, single colour stone, it'll matter greatly, depending on whether it's red or blue and incandescent or a cool LED. Where it comes down to is the decision you probably should make. It's not so much what's the best light to view my opal in, as in where do you spend most of your time? If you're in the daylight where people are going to see your opal in daylight and that's where you want them to see it, find a stone that it's not too bad in daylight. It's multicolored, it's going to show everything. If you're in fluorescent light, multicolour, it's good. It'll show the greens and reds, but probably not so much the blue, and obviously the opposite with the cool white. Incandescent, do the math, you'll see whatever colours are more predominant in the spectrum. So if you're going to spend your time in an office where there's more fluorescent lighting and that's where your opal is going to be viewed most, then the spectrum there being the greens and orange is the best. They're probably the better colours to wear in that lighting. And that's what it's coming down to, is what opal suits the lighting you're most likely to be in when you want your opal to be seen at its best. So that's sort of where I'm at as far as seeing how light interacts and affects what we're going to see, and how to maybe, as I said, I'm going to fill your head full of a few things, how to maybe understand why your opal, when you buy it, didn't look as good when you took it out the shop. The lighting they had, the opal stood out most because of the lighting it was in, and then you take it out of that lighting, it changed everything, which is why it's always good to view your opal in all lights best, if you can, before purchasing. I know it's hard online, it gets difficult because all you've got is photographs, and then you're down to, well, how does the digital camera interpret colour? And yeah, that's a whole different mathematically equated depiction of the image on a digital camera as opposed to like old school film. if you will, where it was more of a direct light imprint rather than a digital representation of the light that was hitting a digital receptor in the camera lens. So I hope this is sort of somehow making a little bit of sense. So we're just going to take a look at these Opal, and we're going to look at them in daylight, cool LED light from my camera, and an incandescent electric bulb light, and also daylight inside, so there's no direct sunlight but there's no other light source. So there'll be 4 different types of lighting to try and get an idea from. Alright, so for a bit of fun, I've gone and grabbed a light that has separate spectrums. Now these are not monochromatic lasers, as in single coloured laser, so there may be a touch of white light to some of the spectrums in this. There's around about 15 colours. So I'm going to go through them and rotate this at the same time, and we're going to see under red light only what happens, under green light and blue light, and a bunch of other spectrums in between. So here goes. So there you go. I did say from the start, like a fool, I'm going to try and answer this question. So that's a bit of information on the interaction with light, Opal, and a little bit of an insight into the rarity of red and blue as colours without the green, oranges, yellows in between. Is the silica spheres usually grow, and so you get a gradient of as they grow up into the ones that rarely but turn into red size. Now the gradient was skipped. It formed small ones, large ones, and only they settled in the array to reflect just red, just blue. And so to have those reflected only is not as common as getting the spectrum between it as well. And so red and blue are a pretty good combination. Just a bit of fun fact there. But lighting, the Opal, and everyone's interpretation up here on what they're seeing, and not misinterpreting what a camera can do to enhance the footage. It's not always an intent. It's not a deceptive move. It can be, obviously, but it's not always intentionally done. So all my footage, whatever, if you've got access to someone with an iPhone 11 Pro Max and that's the camera I've got and I'm using, you could literally grab an Opal, look at it through that camera and tell the difference of what it looks like in real life as opposed to on screen. And I try to represent the camera. I sometimes have to turn it down a touch on the lighting just to make sure it's exactly what I'm seeing in real life under the light. Sometimes the camera will brighten it a bit with the white balancing and all that going on in the digital world. So again, I'm looking off to the side, sorry. I've got the Opal over here. Can't keep my eyes off it. Yeah, hopefully that gives a bit of insight into how light works, why we see the colour we're seeing, and therefore what lighting might be best for what Opal. And again, if you're someone who wears your Opal in a specific type of light the most, try and find an Opal that suits that lighting and it'll show best in that lighting. And of course daylight should just show it in its true form though. So always view it in daylight best you can, always. And then secondarily, the source you're more likely to be in. If it's inside and it's under fluorescent, or if it's house lighting, it's, yeah, as you saw in the footage, there's a little bit of a difference. And that's why it didn't look like it did in the picture type thing happens. And people are like, well, what's the best light? So it's up to you to somehow figure it out with what you've got in your hand. It's too hard for every single source of an Opal photo or footage to have every one of them turn around and say, well, this is the light I used and this is that and this, and then you've got your screen settings on your monitor set a certain way which misrepresented again. So in person is the best view. Always understand if it's on camera, it's probably going to look at its best, or it's poor photography and usually out of focus or something. So there we go. I'm going to get on with the next of what I've got to get up to. We've got 4 parcels to open, so that'll be the next video, sort of an unboxing for 4 people. I've got their material to work with and see where we go from there. So I hope that wasn't too confusing, and I'll see you next video. Cheers. And here's another one I hadn't included in all that. How could I forget? And that's the low light. So when I do low light, that's like the slow-mo footage at the end of some of my videos of stones I've cut. And that involves turning the light on, like so. And once I do that, I'm going to touch my screen on my camera. Now it's going to bring all that into focus, and then I can do this. Turn the light all the way down, right down if I wanted. But somewhere up and around here, it sort of looks the part. Oops, we haven't even got that centered. Anyway, I'm playing around, but yeah, so you get the idea. I can sort of dim the light, bring the light back up. I can even probably make it so bright you can't see the stone. There you go, look at that. So we'll turn it down a bit, and to reset that I'll have to pause and come back, but I won't. I'll just go straight into a low light.